All right, so this video is going to be the first in a series about mixing for depth and width. We're going to lay out a process and a structure to start your mix. So this will be super helpful for beginners, but we're also going to touch on some more advanced concepts. This is a real big topic, so let's get on into it. So when you're first setting up your mix, it's really common to set your faders first and just set them for a generic balance. You're not trying to put anything too loud or too quiet, you're just gaining a general sense of relative volume. Now, of course, any good mix doesn't have all the instruments the exact same volume. That would probably be pretty weird to listen to and definitely boring in terms of depth. But if you get things more or less the same volume, then you can start to assign your panning and figuring out where your instruments will sit best in your stereo spectrum. So when it comes to a drum kit, I prefer to keep the natural panning. That is, from the point of view of the drummer, you have the snare slightly to the left, the hi-hat slightly left of that, and the toms and the ride and the crash off to the right side. The other way to do it would be the exact opposite, as if you were sitting in front of the drum kit and you would pan things to the other side, but that's up to you. And then when it comes to things like a piano, you'll have this natural stereo field, but it's not super hard panned. The low keys are going to be a little on the left, the high keys will be a little on the right, and same thing, you can flip it and have it from the point of view of the audience if you prefer. And if you decide to move your grand piano slightly off to one side of the stereo spectrum or the other, the relative panning will go with it, and that will be fine. That doesn't sound strange with the grand piano unless you're putting it all the way off to one side. Then it'll sound weird, but it should. How often do you go to a concert where there's a grand piano 90 degrees to the right of you? It's obviously on the stage somewhere in front of you, so just try to keep a natural sense of panning. And I leave the bass down the middle in the center channel. And then I think of the most important instruments and I process those next. So these are things like, in this case, an acoustic guitar here that is really a rhythmic element to the song. And then there's also this electric that's just playing chords. And the electric is important because it's giving us our chord progression. Now let's go ahead and bring in the drum and bass. And once I have my relative volume set on the faders, then I'll start the panning process. And I'll take one of the most important instruments, like this acoustic guitar here, and then I'll start separating it from the center. So the way I like to do this is I grab the pan and I close my eyes and I just listen, and I'll usually pull it too far to where it starts to sound strange or unnatural, and then I'll dial it back and look for that sweet spot. But what I'm after is just getting it far enough to the side to gain its separation and it kind of have a little home that it lives in by itself where it becomes a little bit more clear. So let's go ahead and do that. So I think that's a little too far. So that's 15% left. That's pretty nice. Now let's do the same with the electric and we'll drag it to the right. That's a little too far. And that electric is now 13% right. And now we have the first hint of some width and space going on in the mix. And now those frequencies in the center channel are not competing as much. So as you start to create the width, you'll find that things can now be turned down a little bit and you can create a little bit more depth. So what I'm going to do now is actually turn down both the acoustic and the electric a little bit now that they're separated. I could very easily turn that down 1 dB. And now let's do the acoustic. Yeah, and the acoustic, it was very easy to turn it down another ½ dB. So we're creating a little bit more depth already as we create width. Then at this point, I would go to the next set of most important instruments and go down the line from most to least important, and they would get slightly further on the sides and go slightly further into the background. And I would pan them relative to those two guitars we did and do the same separation method, drag them a little too far and bring them back. And I would start building from the center out, and it would go from where you're sitting at the console to further away from you in the distance and off to the sides. And you would gain depth and width as you build out your sound field, as you lay out your mix. So what we have here is a piano and a synth, and the piano has a nice melody going on, so it's definitely one of the more important instruments, so we're not going to want it too far in the background. And the synth is just doing something really simple and it's more ambient. Let's go ahead and play you the mix with the piano and the synth, still panned in the middle. All right, so that's the synth that we have going on. We haven't done a lot of EQ work to this yet, which is totally going to need to be done, but at this stage, we're just assigning some depth and some width and getting the separation. And here's the piano. But the important thing here is to consider the arrangement when you're assigning things the position and the mix. So, for example, if I play that electric guitar with this piano, just those two soloed out, what you can hear right away is that the electric is playing chords in the same register that the piano melody is occupying. So they're not going to naturally separate themselves very well. If this piano melody was played an octave lower, they would separate a lot easier. But now if we play that piano with the acoustic, let's take a listen. Yeah, that melody on the piano on the right hand is playing notes that are higher than the acoustic is playing. So if we pan this piano to the left on the side of the acoustic and find a nice home for it there, it's going to naturally mix itself a lot easier than if we park it in with that electric guitar. And that synth and that electric guitar are not going to be stepping on each other at all. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and pan the piano left. We'll take it left of that acoustic guitar, and then we'll bring it back and look for that sweet spot of separation. And that sounds pretty good. That's at 19% left, and that original acoustic was at 15% left. That little bit of separation is great. They're not stepping on top of each other, and they found nice little holes to live in. And now that we've separated them, you can hear that if we wanted to, we could probably turn that piano down a little bit. But as you start to gain separation and width, more depth options open up to you because you can hear naturally these things living on their own in their own spaces. So now let's go ahead and pan this synth off to the right and find a home for it in there behind the electric. And actually, even at 16% right there, we have nice separation. That synth has its own little space to live behind the electric. And again, that electric ended up being parked 13% right. So, yep, a very effective method. And as you bring your instruments into your mix, you can separate them out in terms of importance and have the arrangement in mind so they start to mix themselves. Will make your end job a lot easier. And you can also then start to decide if you want to make adjustments in the depth. At the end of the day, you're not trying to make everything the same volume anyway. You want a sense of depth. Otherwise, your mix just sounds sterile. You know, certain things with more energy need to be louder. Certain things sound better in the background just to give you contrast. But I just wanted to lay that out as an example for you so you can see it. If you're a newer engineer, hopefully that might give you something to go on because that gives you a structure. Just kind of build your way out from the console in your stereo field that you're listening to. You can just make decisions about importance and relevance, you know, related to rhythm, related to melody, related to chord progression, and you can make those decisions. You just take it one step at a time, separate for width, and then adjust for depth. All right, so we've brought in 4 instruments that are pretty important to the overall context of the mix, but we don't have a lead yet. There's no vocal. I do have a lead guitar here, but we're going to bring that in later, and the lead will definitely give the mix a lot more contrast. And we also don't have a lot of things that are super far in the background, which is what I want to get to next. But before that, I do want to bring in this crunchy rhythm guitar. Let's bring in that guitar, pan dead center, and we'll take a look at how to set that in the mix. A really common thing to do with crunchy rhythm guitars like that is to separate the track into two tracks and to pan them one hard left and one hard right. And that's a really great technique, not just for guitars, but we're going to go ahead and do that because that's a different way to add width to the mix. And I wanted to walk through that process with you. So if I go ahead and duplicate this track and I pan one hard left and one hard right, now we're going to have a little more signal. We're going to have to turn these down a touch. But this is a really good way to add a sense of width. It still kind of sounds like they're in mono, but they're technically not. But hey, headphones aren't technically stereo either. So anyway, let's take a listen. Now, it still sounds really strange not having reverb on anything yet, but for the sake of the tutorial and doing this the right way, we're going to get to all that later. But let's go ahead and process these guitars a tiny little bit. So now I've created a submix track for these two guitars. And now what I've done here is on that submix track, I've added a little bit of mid-side EQ. And this is a classic mid-side trick where if you're going to do a boost on the side channel with your parametric EQ here, you're going to do the exact equal and opposite cut on the mid channel. So the top one, blue, is adding 3 dB to the sides only, starting at 8K. And then exactly underneath it, I have a 3 dB high shelf cut starting at 8K, but only in the mid channel. So let's take a listen to this crunchy guitar with the mix again, and then I'm going to start with it off, and then I'm going to turn this on, and you'll be able to hear a little bit of widening and extra depth, and it'll be a little more interesting to listen to. Very nice. And when there's some reverb on there, that's going to sound a lot better. But now that we've taken a look at bringing in some crunchy rhythm guitar here and we're getting some more energy in the mix, now next thing I want to do is bring in some of those more seemingly less important background instruments, which are actually crucial important for contrast. So let's take a look at those. So here's a little bit of a synth string. Just a triad on a string section there, and then we're going to bring in some horns. So this little bit of orchestration, what we're going to do is we have those two tracks running into a submix track, and then the strings we're going to pan 50% left and the horns 50% right. So we're talking like a 45-degree angle here in perspective. And then we're going to turn on a little bit of a chorus effect. And then as soon as that chorus is on, it stops sounding so strange with the panning, especially if you're on headphones. Let me turn it back off. And back on. And that really needs to be souped up in reverb and delay, in my opinion. But for the purpose of this is going to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to back that way into the background. And the point is when you're listening to this piece, you're not really going to notice that orchestration, but you would notice it if we hit mute on that track, which we're going to do in a little bit. And then the other thing that we've added is this weird orchestral pits sound that I have cranked through a bunch of amplifiers and saturators and stuff to come up with this little tone. And that sound does have a lot of stereo reverb and delays going on, which is going to be mainly the topic for the next video in this series. But I did want to give you a taste of it in this video today of what reverb and delay done in stereo can do for that sense of width and depth in the mix. And same kind of thing, that's going to be parked way in the background. So what I'm going to do now is play the whole mix for you with those two things turned off, and then we're going to bring them both in so you can hear the difference. Yeah, so the point isn't what these sounds are or aren't. The point is if you have something that is way deep in the background and also is adding a whole bunch of width to the mix, you can make it really imperceptible, and that's adding the contrast to everything that's in the foreground, and you really notice it when it goes away. Now, as far as the mid-side EQ goes, this is a great way to gain width in a mix, and it's best used very subtly, but I want to start with showing you the bass. Now, as we started, this was dry down the center, but a little bit of mid-side EQ, in this case at about 1.7K. We're doing a really broad boost in the side channel and an equal and opposite cut in the mid channel. So this is covering all of the high mids that the bass is generating, where it's cutting through the mix and giving a little bit of presence of width, a little bit of stereo influence, but not in the low stuff. I'm going to turn that on for you so you can hear the difference in your headphones. Yeah, so it's super subtle, but those little tricks will just give little hints of things widening up in your mix. Very, very useful, and we did something similar on this pad. On the pad, we did the same mid-side trick, but we did it at 5K going up. So starting at 5K, the pad is going to split further into the side stereo spectrum with an equal and opposite cut in the mids. So I'm going to start with it off, and then we'll bring that on in the pad. And in your headphones there, again, it's subtle, but you should be able to hear it open up. Yeah, and with it on, you can hear that there's a little bit more color and width drifting off into the left and right. So those are very subtle techniques, but very, very useful. Another really important thing about gaining depth has to do with the transients. And I do have a video on transient shaping, which I'll link to in the description. But transient shapers are a really easy way to dial things forward and backward in your mix. So for example, what we're going to do with the drums is bring the transients in the drums forward, and that'll make the drums pop out of the mix real well. So let's take a listen to that. I'm going to start to dial it in now. Now I'll turn it off so you can hear the difference. Back on. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. It makes all the cracks of the drums pop right out of the mix. I'm actually going to dial it back a little bit. That was a bit much for what we want here. And now we really need to hear that lead guitar. So let's bring something lead and in our face to the foreground, and that'll make the background more relevant. Now that guitar is bone dry right now, so we're gonna soup it up with a bunch of stereo reverb and delay. So when it's soloed out, there's a lot of delay and reverb going on. It sounds like a bit much, but in the mix, compared to the dry, it's way more pleasant to have all those effects going on. So let's turn it up a bit. Now, just to drive the context home one more time, those background sounds, I'm going to go ahead and mute those again one more time just so you can hear the effect of when they go away. See, the mix is all of a sudden way more empty. Now I'm going to bring them back on. Yep, you can barely hear them. They're way in the background, but you really miss them when they're gone. And again, that is all contrast of depth going on there. So. But really the biggest takeaway of this video that I'm hoping you'll get out of this is it's really all about contrast. In terms of volume, if there's nothing quiet in the background and nothing to contrast them to, then you've really lost all of the depth of your mix, because without something in the background, everything is foreground. So contrast is really everything in a mix. And if you don't lose that perspective, I think you'll get a lot of great results. So for me personally, what I try to do is just always keep that idea of contrast in mind, and things have to be relative to each other to even have meaning at all. We're trying to build a space here, but that means there's outsides, there's tops, there's bottoms, there's up front, there's background. So if you don't have those elements somewhere in the mix, you've lost the relativity, you've lost the contrast, then you've really missed out on a big opportunity. But of all the things that we've talked about today about depth and width, yes, your faders and your panning are your biggest tools, but after that is reverb and delay. And in the next video, we're gonna get into that in depth. But just to recap the mid-side EQ and the transient processing and the other things that we talked about, we are gonna go ahead and end this video by turning on the reverbs and delays and give you a little taste of those. And then in the next video, we're gonna go in depth and explain them. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn on that crunchy guitar again because we've only heard it dry so far, and then we're going to add a little bit of effects to it. So here's the original dry, and here it is again with the delays and reverbs. Now let's listen to that original electric dry. And the wet. And the acoustic. And wet. And then with the drums, typically you wouldn't have all of your effects on the drum bus. You would want to have them on the individual drums so you can shake it up. But since we've only been listening to the drums dry so far, let's hear that again. And here's the drums wet. Yeah, all of a sudden everything is way more interesting and a lot more fun to listen to. And the listener has all of this impression of space and width and distance going on that's not there without it. So now I'm going to go ahead and play you the original mix, panned center and with no effects on them the way that we started out. And then I'll switch over to everything wet and panned and the mid-side EQ and the transients and everything we've done so far in this video, including the reverb and delay sends. And then in the next video, I'll explain those reverb and delay sends, and we'll play around with that a lot and break it down because that stuff's really important. But thanks for checking this out, and as always, let me know in the comments what you think and if there's anything else that you want me to tackle, and I'll see you in the next one.